The night Eliza Winters lost everything was the same night the stars disappeared from her sky. Not literally, the constellations still hung above the smoking ruins of what had once been her life, but she could no longer see their light. As she stood barefoot on the cold asphalt, watching firefighters battle the blaze consuming her home, she felt something inside her collapse like the charred beams of her living room ceiling. "Ma'am, you need to step back," a firefighter urged, his voice barely penetrating the fog surrounding her mind. She clutched the only things she'd managed to save, her daughter's stuffed rabbit, singed at one ear, and the wedding photo that had hung in their hallway for 12 years. Everything else, her husband's ashes, her daughter's drawings, the life they'd built, was being devoured by flames that seemed to mock her with their hungry, dancing light. If you've ever felt your world crumble around you, if you've ever wondered how to find the strength to begin again when everything you love has been taken, then this story might just be the one you need today. Sometimes the most beautiful rebuilding begins in the ashes of what we've lost. If this resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories that remind us of the resilience of the human heart. This is Eliza's story, a woman who believed love had burned away with everything else she cherished, until an unexpected encounter showed her that sometimes, what looks like an ending is merely the first painful stroke on a new canvas. 3 months after the fire, Eliza moved through life like a ghost haunting her own existence. The insurance money had secured her a small apartment across town, but she'd furnished it with only the essentials: a bed she rarely slept in, a table where she didn't eat, a couch where she spent hours staring at nothing. The walls remained bare, unpainted. She couldn't bear to hang new pictures when the faces she wanted to see were gone. Her daughter, Sophie, had been at a sleepover the night of the fire. Her husband, James, had not. The official report cited faulty wiring in the kitchen wall. A random accident. A cruel twist of fate. The kind of tragedy that made neighbors bring casseroles and friends make promises to stay in touch, promises that faded as quickly as the flowers on James's grave. Eliza had taken bereavement leave from her position as head librarian, but the days stretched endlessly before her. Her sister, Maggie, called daily from Seattle, her voice tight with worry. "You need to get out of that apartment, Liza," Maggie insisted during their morning call. "It's been 3 months. I go out," Eliza replied, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through blinds she rarely opened. "I get groceries. That's not living, that's surviving. There's a difference." Eliza closed her eyes. "Surviving is all I can manage right now." The community center called again. "They really need someone for that literacy program. You used to love teaching adults to read." "I used to love a lot of things." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things Maggie wanted to say but didn't. "Just think about it," Maggie finally said. "For me. For Sophie." The mention of her daughter's name sent a familiar pain through Eliza's chest. Sophie was staying with Maggie now, attending school in Seattle while Eliza got back on her feet. Both sisters knew it was more complicated than that. How could Eliza care for a child when she could barely care for herself? After hanging up, Eliza stood at her window, looking down at the street below. People hurried past, to jobs, to lunch dates, to lives that continued despite tragedy. How did they do it? How did the world keep spinning when hers had stopped so completely? Her phone buzzed with a text from Maggie, * community center number attached. Director's name is Marcus. He's expecting your call, *. Eliza almost deleted it. Instead, she found herself dialing before she could change her mind. The Millfield Community Center occupied an old brick building that had once been a school. Its hallways smelled of floor polish and paper, comfortingly familiar to Eliza, who had spent her career surrounded by books. She arrived 20 minutes early for her meeting with the director, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her blouse, the first time she'd worn anything but sweatpants in weeks. "You must be Eliza." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm. She turned to find a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He wore jeans and a faded blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with what looked like old burned scars. "Marcus Reeves," he said, extending his hand. "Sorry to startle you. I saw you looking a bit lost and figured you might be our potential literacy volunteer." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. A working man's hands, not what she'd expected from a community center director. "I'm not lost," she said automatically, then flushed. "I mean, yes, I'm Eliza Winters. My sister Maggie called about the position." "Maggie." "Right." His smile deepened. "She was quite persuasive about your qualifications. Said you could teach a rock to read Shakespeare." Despite herself, Eliza felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "Maggie exaggerates. Well, we don't need Shakespeare here. Just someone patient enough to help people who've spent their lives hiding the fact that they can't read a menu or a job application." He gestured toward a hallway. "My office is this way, if you'd like to talk details." As they walked, Eliza noticed the walls were covered with photographs, not professional portraits, but candid shots of people of all ages engaged in various activities. Cooking classes, art workshops, children playing basketball in a gym visible through an open door. "You run all these programs?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "And then some. The center serves everyone from kids needing after-school care to seniors wanting company. The literacy program is just one piece." He paused at a door marked "Director," but made no move to open it. "Actually, would you mind if we talked somewhere else? Beautiful day, and I've been cooped up all morning with budget spreadsheets." Without waiting for her answer, he led her through a side door into a small garden tucked between the community center and the neighboring building. Raised beds overflowed with vegetables and flowers, and several wooden benches sat beneath a pergola draped with climbing roses. "This is unexpected," Eliza said, looking around. "Our community garden. Started it 3 years ago on what used to be a concrete pad where kids dealt drugs." He gestured to a bench. "The seniors tend it mostly, but everyone helps. We use the vegetables in our cooking classes and food pantry." As they sat, Eliza noticed a group of elderly women watching them curiously from one of the garden beds. Marcus waved, and they waved back, whispering among themselves. "Don't mind the garden committee," he said with a chuckle. "They've been trying to set me up with every single woman who walks through those doors for years." Eliza stiffened. "I'm not." "I know," he said quickly, his expression sobering. "Your sister mentioned your situation. I'm very sorry for your loss." The simple acknowledgement, delivered without the usual awkward platitudes, caught Eliza off guard. She looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus seemed to sense her discomfort and smoothly changed the subject. "So, the literacy program meets Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 6 to 8. We currently have 12 adult learners ranging from complete beginners to those working on GED prep. Our previous instructor moved to Arizona last month, and we've been struggling to find a replacement." "I haven't taught in years," Eliza admitted. "I've been working as a librarian." "Perfect. You know books, you know how to help people find information. The rest is just patience and compassion, which I suspect you have in abundance." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that her reserves of both had been depleted by grief, but something in his steady gaze stopped her. "I can only commit to a month," she said instead. "I'm not sure what my plans are after that." It was the first time she'd thought beyond the next day since the fire. Marcus nodded. "A month would help us immensely. And who knows? You might find you enjoy it." As they discussed the details, Eliza felt something shift inside her, not healing, exactly, but a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself. When they stood to leave, one of the elderly gardeners approached, holding out a small bunch of lavender tied with twine. "For the new teacher," the woman said, pressing it into Eliza's hands. "Lavender helps with sleep and sad hearts." Before Eliza could respond, the woman patted her hand and returned to her companions. Eliza looked at Marcus questioningly. "That's Iris," he explained. "She believes flowers can fix most problems. And she's usually right, in her way." As Eliza left the community center, lavender in hand, she realized she'd agreed to return on Tuesday. It wasn't much, just 2 evenings a week for a month, but it was more of a commitment to the future than she'd made since the night her world burned down. The first literacy class was harder than Eliza had anticipated. Not because the students were difficult, they were eager, respectful, and grateful for her help, but because being needed again made her realize how empty her life had become. As she helped a middle-aged man named Carlos sound out words in a simple story, she felt both the weight of his trust and the echo of reading bedtime stories to Sophie. "You did well tonight," Marcus said as she gathered her materials after class. He'd stopped by to check on her, though she suspected it was more to ensure she'd actually shown up than to evaluate her teaching. "They're doing all the hard work," she replied. "I'm just guiding them. That's all any of us can do for each other." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "A few of us usually grab coffee after Thursday's class at the diner across the street. You're welcome to join." Eliza's instinct was to decline, to retreat to her empty apartment where grief was her only companion. But the thought of returning to those silent rooms suddenly seemed unbearable. "Maybe," she said, surprising herself. "I'll see how I feel Thursday." Thursday came, and Eliza found herself sitting in a booth at Millie's diner with Marcus, a retired English teacher named Helen who volunteered with ESL classes, and Darius, a college student who ran the center's computer lab. The conversation flowed around her, comfortable and undemanding. They discussed books, complained about parking downtown, and debated the merits of various coffee brands. Normal conversation. The kind she'd avoided for months. "Eliza, you're the professional here," Helen said, drawing her into the discussion. "In your expert librarian opinion, are physical books becoming obsolete?" "Never," Eliza replied without hesitation. "Digital has its place, but there's something irreplaceable about holding a book in your hands. The weight of it, the smell of the pages, the sound when you turn them." "See?" Helen said triumphantly to Darius. "I told you." "I'm not arguing against books," Darius protested. "I'm just saying digital access means more people can read more books. It's democratizing literature." "You're both right," Marcus interjected, his eyes on Eliza. "Some things need to be preserved exactly as they are. Others need to evolve. The trick is knowing which is which." Something in his tone made Eliza wonder if they were still talking about books. She looked down at her coffee, suddenly aware that this was the longest conversation she'd had with anyone besides Maggie in months. As they left the diner, Marcus fell into step beside her. "Which way are you headed?" "Oakwood Apartments," she said. "About 10 blocks east. Mind if I walk with you?" "I'm over on Elm Street." The night was cool, stars visible despite the city lights. They walked in comfortable silence for a block before Marcus spoke again. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seemed more alive tonight than when I first met you." Eliza tensed. "You don't know me well enough to make that observation." "You're right. I apologize." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I have a bad habit of speaking too directly. My wife used to say I had all the subtlety of a bulldozer." The casual mention of his wife caught Eliza's attention. "Used to? She died 6 years ago. Cancer." He said it matter-of-factly, without the raw edge that still colored Eliza's voice when she spoke of James. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "Thank you. It was a long time ago now." He glanced at her. "Does it bother you when people say that?" "I'm sorry. It used to drive me crazy, like they were apologizing for something they had no control over." The question was so unexpected, so precisely aligned with feelings she'd never articulated, that Eliza stopped walking. Yes, she admitted. That and, he's in a better place and, time heals all wounds. Don't forget everything happens for a reason, Marcus added with a grimace. God, yes. I wanted to scream every time someone said that after the fire. They resumed walking, and Eliza found herself telling him about the night of the fire, words spilling out that she hadn't shared with anyone, not even Maggie. How she'd been at a school fundraiser while James stayed home with a cold. How she'd called to check on him and gotten no answer. How she'd assumed he was sleeping until she turned onto their street and saw the flames. Marcus listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes. When she finished, they had reached her apartment building, and she was surprised to find her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her face. I don't know why I told you all that. Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger, he said. Less history, less expectation. We're not exactly strangers anymore. No, he agreed. I suppose we're not. He made no move to leave, and Eliza found herself reluctant to end the evening. For the first time in months, she'd spoken about James without feeling like she was drowning. Would you like to come up for tea? She asked impulsively, then immediately regretted it. I mean, that wasn't, I'm not. I know, he said, saving her from her stammering. And yes, tea would be nice. If you're sure. In her apartment, Eliza became acutely aware of how impersonal the space was. No pictures on the walls, no decorative touches, nothing that marked it as hers except a few books stacked on the coffee table. I haven't really settled in, she explained as she filled the kettle. Temporary housing has a feel to it, Marcus observed, looking around. I lived in a place like this for almost a year after Claire died. Couldn't bring myself to make it home. What changed? Eliza asked, setting mugs on the counter. I realized I was waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. For the pain to go away completely before I started living again. He accepted the tea she offered. But that's not how it works. The pain changes, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. But it doesn't disappear. That's not very encouraging, Eliza said, leading him to the small living room. Isn't it? I found it freeing. Once I stopped waiting for some magical moment of complete healing, I could start building something new around the broken parts. As they talked, Eliza found herself studying him more closely. The lines around his eyes spoke of laughter as much as sorrow. His hands, with their burned scars and calluses, told stories of work and pain and recovery. He was probably in his late 40s, a few years older than her, but there was an energy about him that had nothing to do with age. How did you get those scars? She asked during a lull in conversation, nodding toward his forearms. He glanced down as if surprised to see them. These? House fire, ironically enough. I was a contractor before I worked at the center. One of my job sites caught fire while I was checking some wiring. Got everyone out, but not before this happened. He rolled up his sleeve further to reveal he flickered in Jack's voice. What's that? We help thousands of families every year, she said softly. But we rarely ask them what they truly need. The following week, Alexandra arrived at the community center, not with cameras, not with press, but quietly. She observed, she spoke to single parents juggling 2 jobs. She saw broken equipment that hadn't been replaced in years, she watched Jack fix a leaking pipe while simultaneously helping a teenager fill out a college application form. Later, as they stood alone in the empty hallway, she turned to him. You don't just repair buildings, she said. You repair hope. Jack looked down, uncomfortable with praise that I'm just doing my job. No, Alexandra replied gently. You're doing what my foundation should be doing, showing up. A month later, everything changed. The Winters Foundation announced a major expansion project, full funding for the community center's renovation, new educational programs, healthcare partnerships, and emergency housing assistance for struggling families. But that wasn't all. At the small press event, which Jack had tried to avoid attending, Alexandra stepped up to the podium. "There is someone who reminded me why this work matters," she said, scanning the crowd until her eyes found Jack. A man who had every reason to keep walking, but chose integrity instead. Jack felt his throat tighten. "Wealth can build buildings," Alexandra continued, "but character builds communities. That is why I am honored to appoint Jack Bennett as Director of Community Outreach for the Winters Foundation." The room erupted in applause. Jack stood frozen. This wasn't charity, this was recognition. That evening, Jack sat at the kitchen table, but this time, there were no overdue bills in front of him. Lily ran into the room waving a newspaper clipping with his picture on it. "Dad! You're famous!" He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "No, kiddo," he whispered. "We're just, okay now." A knock came at the door. When Jack opened it, Alexandra stood there, not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, just as a woman smiling softly. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "You didn't just return my handbag that day." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What else did I return?" She held his gaze. "You returned my faith in people." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily peeked from behind Jack. "Hi, purse lady." They all laughed, and in that small apartment, once filled with fear and unpaid notices, something else now filled the space: stability, respect, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Sometimes, the smallest act of honesty creates the biggest ripple, and sometime when you return what isn't yours, life returns something far greater. Sparkles. The end. Sparkles.